Thank you, Mike, Amanda, and John. I mean, one of the issues that people, I think, has always been kind of questioning is virtual training as effective as face-to-face training? Okay, this is question. I think you faced it maybe when you trained people, or when you suggested an online training. So is it as effective, and is it credible? Would like to take this on?
I'm already off mute. I forgot to put it back on, so I'll jump right in. I remember I started this very early. As I said, 1996, 97 was when I started getting interest. And I have two thoughts on this. I introduced it to the head of the Africa region that I was working with. And I had him on a call. It wasn't a Zoom call. Back then we were using another platform, but it was one of the first meeting platforms like this. And I was helping him with budgets. And I was basically training, but it was more of a performance support than a wide training. He had never been on the platform. And he's a great guy. I've worked with him for years, very smart. And I finished, I said, isn't this amazing? I was able to train you on this. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. You are at the time he was in Ghana. We were getting it done. We solved the problems. He was trained. Everything was resolved. And he said, this is a great tool. I hope we don't use it for more bad training. And I think that is the best quote I've ever heard. We assume that face-to-face training is good. And the fact is, much of our face-to-face training is not good. And it hasn't been good for a very long time. And so I think the question I would change and say, how do we make good training? And it might be face-to-face, it might be online. It depends on what you're trying to train, how you're train it, and who the people are you're trying to train. And sometimes face-to-face is exactly what you need to do. Sometimes it's not. But either choice, you have to invest in good training design. So I'll stop on that.
Well, maybe I can pick up on that, because I think that's a really interesting point. I think it's understanding you're not trying to do training to do training. You're trying to do training to achieve something. And to be clear, well, what is the goal? Imagine if you were doing a logical framework. What's the outcome? What's the change? What are you trying to do? And this is, I think, and not thinking this through is why I think there is so much bad training. I mean, I've seen so many organizations fly people all over the world. It's like shopping for development, but there's not much learning. And then I think it's also about understanding what are the advantages and disadvantages of different approaches. What's the individual trying to do, but what's the organization trying to do? So about 2-3 years ago, with one big international NGO, we did project management training. And we used virtual technology, and we trained, I mean, in round numbers, 600 people all around the world. And I did a calculation on the back of an envelope to how much would this have cost face to face, and the answer it would have been $250,000. Well, no organization is going to spend that training staff and project management, and they shouldn't, arguably. So it then doesn't become a question of which is best. It becomes a question of, do you train at all? Or who do you train? So going back to Mike's earlier point, that you end up rationing the training. And one of the things I'm quite convinced about, you can have the very best training, amazing, but if only 2 people do it, it's going to be really difficult to change anything in the organization. So you need scale in the learning as part of the equation. if 80% of the people in the organization have done training in whatever it is, in project management or finance, it's still difficult, but at least you've got a common language. You've got some common tools, some common reference points. So it becomes possible. If the only person who's had the training is like one of the finance staff, and they then now try to get another 50 or 60 people, it's really hard. So when you start thinking through about what change do you want, and you work back, that's when you can start saying, well, do we need face-to-face training? As Mike said, maybe that's the best way to do it. Maybe we need to use technology to have virtual learning and scale. Maybe we need a combination. Maybe we need to use technology for what it's good at, which is scale and breadth, but we need people to help with application, only because people are much better at analysis and depth. So I don't think it's a binary question. It is, I think, quite a complex question, Hazim, and I think it's so I certainly think the virtual learning can be just as effective at achieving these different organizational goals, but it's likely to be part of a range of different learning approaches which are going to get the organization the change it wants to come out of the learning.
I mean, I totally understand. I mean, but it's like the common impression. Like we just ran a polling with the audience here about the effectiveness of virtual learning, and you have like almost 70% still believe face-to-face is more effective, while only 25% they say it's the same effectiveness. So there's always this, this thing on the back of my mind is
maybe Hazim, it's not always the right question. So for example, if I want to learn about, let's say, project management, all right, I want the world's best project manager to be sitting next to me waiting for me to have a question, and I want a really good trainer next to me. I want it to be individual. Mm-hmm. That would be fantastic. That would be amazing. Can I get that? No. All right, so what can I get? And that's when you come back to Mike's point that so much face-to-face training is awful. I mean, we've all sat through face-to-face trainings where somebody was lecturing at us, and we got here is PowerPoint slide number 72, and you're going, I mean, the great thing about doing it virtually is you can turn the camera off whilst you yawn. Or you can angle the screen like this, so you can just see somebody's eyes, and you can be having a coffee, having a sandwich, or something. So I don't think it's about, is it better, is it worse? It's, what are you trying to do? What's the best way to do it? And then I think sometimes pushing back. I've seen many senior, older, usually male managers say they are not ready for virtual learning, meaning their staff. Their staff are all 20, 22, 25. They're all over Facebook, Twitter, whatever. They're fine with virtual learning. What the person means is the older male manager is not ready for something and is then making that the general statement on behalf of everybody.
I just wanted to add to that, because I have worked in the Middle East for about 10 years, and I do understand that face-to-face interaction is really important. But at the end of the day, in a lot of the courses that I've delivered in that region in particular, but around the world too, you're trying to gather, all of the team members in one location for a really condensed learning experience. And they end up walking away with about 10 to 20% of what you actually covered, right? So you try to squish a bunch of content into 3 or 4 days, or sometimes 5 days, where people are also thinking about the projects that are currently running. They're going out on their phone, they're checking their emails. and they don't really get the opportunity to reflect on how the learning is applicable to their projects or to their organization. What virtual training allows, and particularly things like social learning, is the opportunity for you to go at a pace that is right for you. Okay, so nobody's dictating that you need to, within these next 4 hours, you need to cover these topics. So, okay, within these 5 weeks, you're going to cover these topics. It allows you to reflect, and it allows you to interact with people you normally wouldn't have who aren't in the room in a face-to-face training, because you can't bring all your team members and everybody from around the world into one location. Whereas in virtual learning, you can do that. You can all be in the same room. So I think that's something else that people need to consider is, how much do you actually get out of that face-to-face training? Are you really paying attention? Because in my experience, it's just not the case.